In the vast plains of Sevuti, a young lion named Waziba lived under the shadow of a legend. His father, Sekekama, ruled with unmatched strength and wisdom. Sekekama was revered not just by his pride, but by all who dared roam the wild lands. Waziba, however, was not born a king. He was the smallest of the cubs, often overlooked, often doubted. He spent his early days watching his father lead hunts, patrol borders, and fight off intruders. Waziba admired Sekekama, but also feared never becoming like him. He played with his brothers, learned the basics of survival, and followed the elders, absorbing every lesson, every scent, every sound. But unlike his more aggressive siblings, Waziba showed patience. He didn't rush to prove himself. He waited, observed, and quietly studied the land and the law of the wild. While others fought for attention, he grew in silence, unnoticed. Lions in the pride whispered that he lacked fire, that he wouldn't last long once cast out. Still, Waziba never complained. He knew that greatness didn't come from noise, it came from endurance. Every scar on Sekekama's face told a story of struggle, not pride. And Waziba wanted to earn his own. His days were filled with small victories, catching his first hare, defending his portion of meat, standing his ground when challenged. They were nothing compared to the battles of the kings, but to Waziba they were everything. He looked at the horizon often, wondering what lay beyond the comfort of his pride's borders. He didn't know when his time would come, but deep within, something stirred, a quiet certainty that one day he would not only walk in Sekekama's footsteps, he would leave prints of his own. The dry season came early that year. Prey grew scarce and tensions ran high. Sekekama, older now, grew more distant, guarding the pride from threats only he understood. Waziba, nearing adulthood, began to feel the shift. The elders whispered of his time to leave approaching. No young male could remain forever. Nature demanded they walk alone to earn a place, or die trying. One dawn, a roar thundered across the plains. Foreign lions had crossed the river, challenging the borders. Sekekama went to meet them. Waziba followed from a distance, heart pounding. He watched the standoff from a rocky outcrop. His father stood tall, unshaken, but behind the challengers were young, muscular lions, restless, eager for blood. Sekekama turned back after the confrontation, his body bruised but his pride intact. Yet Waziba noticed the limp. The king was weakening. That night Waziba sat by the edge of the camp. He stared at the stars, remembering his father's stories of exile, conquest, and return. He felt something ignite inside him. The call was not a voice, it was a pull, a rising urge to carve his own fate. He knew what awaited him beyond the pride, hunger, loneliness, death. But something deeper called him forward, the chance to become more than just a son, to become his own legend. Hey everyone, if you're enjoying this video, make sure to subscribe to the channel so that YouTube can understand and deliver more of our content to you. Without a word, Waziba stood, his mane brushing the wind. The path had opened, and though he did not know where it would lead, he was ready to follow it. Waziba paced near the edge of his father's territory, torn between instinct and fear. The world beyond the pride was vast and merciless. Stories of rogue lions being torn apart, starving for weeks, or dying alone haunted his mind. He had strength, yes, but not certainty. For nights he lingered near the outskirts, watching vultures circle distant kills, hearing unknown roars in the dark. Each sound reminded him of what he might lose: the safety of the pride, the warmth of familiar ground, the silent approval of Sekekama. Was he ready to give that up? The younger lions who left before him had never returned. Some were brothers, some were friends. The wild didn't forgive hesitation, nor did it offer second chances. Doubt rooted itself in his chest. What if he wasn't meant to be more? What if his place was always to remain in the background, remembered only as Sekekama's quiet son? One evening he returned to the heart of the pride and stood over a sleeping cub. He saw innocence, dependence, everything he was leaving behind. But in that moment, he also saw his own reflection years ago, and he understood. He had outgrown this place. The time had come, whether he feared it or not. Sekekama found Waziba alone the next morning, watching the sunrise in silence. The old king sat beside him, his breathing heavier than before. He said nothing for a while. The winds carried the scent of change. "You've been restless," Sekekama finally said. "You feel the pull." Waziba didn't respond, but his eyes revealed everything. "When I left my pride, I was smaller than you. I had no name, no allies. I left with nothing but the will to survive," Sekekama continued. "I did not become king because I was the strongest. I became king because I didn't stop walking even when I bled." Waziba turned to him. "How did you know it was time?" Sekekama looked to the rising sun. "Because I could no longer stay where I was." The old lion rose with effort and touched his forehead to Waziba's. "Go, take no pride with you. Take no name but your own. And if you ever return, return as more than my son." It was the first time Sekekama had called him by his name alone. No title, no comparison. That blessing, quiet as it was, lit a fire deeper than any roar. Before dawn, Waziba left. No farewell, no ceremony, just paw prints fading into the dust behind him. The world he had known, warm with familiarity, fell away with each step. Ahead lay the unknown, where no scent was familiar and no voice called him back. He walked for days alone. Hunger gnawed at his belly. He chased small prey but missed more often than he caught. Storms soaked his mane and sun cracked the earth beneath his feet. Still, he pressed forward. One night he crossed into the territory of an older rogue lion. The scent was strong, the ground warned of danger, but Waziba didn't turn back. He crouched low, waited, and watched. When the rogue appeared, scarred, limping, but fierce, Waziba didn't run. He roared. The fight was brutal. The rogue struck hard, but Waziba was faster, younger, burning with something he couldn't name. When the dust settled, Waziba stood, victorious, not unharmed, but unbroken. He didn't stay. The fight wasn't for land. It was a message, to himself and to the world, that he had crossed a line. There was no return to safety now. That night, beneath a foreign sky, Waziba licked his wounds and rested for the first time, not as a cub, not as a prince, but as a lion without a master. His journey had begun in truth. Waziba's days turned into weeks. The wild was now his teacher, ruthless and direct. Every rustle in the grass, every shifting wind taught him to listen, to adapt. He moved with caution, not fear, learning to avoid elephant herds, outmaneuver hyenas, and disappear when lions roared in the distance. In a dry gorge where prey gathered at dusk, Waziba met another lion, older, lean, with golden eyes that held no threat. They circled one another, not with teeth, but with measured steps. There was no fight, just recognition. The lion's name was Muru, a wanderer like Waziba, and for a time they hunted together. From Muru, Waziba learned to track silently, to strike not only with force, but with precision. They shared kills, defended each other from scavengers, and traded silent stories of pain and ambition. Yet Waziba never forgot his goal. While Muru was content with wandering, Waziba sought dominion. Their paths parted after a brutal drought. With food scarce, cooperation turned into rivalry. Waziba left without conflict, but with a sharper edge. In time he faced others, challengers with hungry eyes and heavy paws. One scarred his shoulder deeply, another nearly tore his ear. Each encounter forged him harder, taught him what Sekekama's words had not. By the time Waziba reached the edges of Sevuti, he was no longer the unsure youth who had watched his father from a distance. His mane was fuller, his muscles thick with survival. and his eyes held something cold and certain. He heard whispers of a territory ruled by aging kings, vulnerable from within, a place ripe for a lion who feared nothing. Sevuti. It called to him, not with kindness but with the promise of war. Sevuti was no ordinary land. It was the crown jewel of the wild, fertile yet fierce, ruled by lions who had held power for years. The territory was vast, full of prey, and guarded by coalitions who trusted in their dominance. But time had begun to chip away at their strength. The kings of Sevuti had grown complacent, resting on old victories, unaware that something relentless now approached. Waziba studied the terrain from a distance, watched the pride movements, marked watering holes, memorized patrol routes. He didn't rush. The fall of empires came not from brute strength alone, but from understanding their cracks. At night, he walked close to the border, letting his scent drift just enough to provoke. The ruling males responded with roars, but they didn't come out. Not yet. They thought him another drifter, a wanderer without purpose. They were wrong. Waziba's challenge was not just to fight, it was to conquer. He would not simply win territory, he would break their legacy, and he knew the moment to strike was near. The whispers grew among the animals. A lion with fire in his blood had come, one who bore no name but his own. A storm on 4 legs. Standing atop a dry hill one evening, Waziba stared into Sevuti. He felt the weight of what lay ahead. To take this land meant risking everything. To walk into the cave meant confronting death itself. But he did not tremble. He had bled for less, and for this he would give all. The night Waziba entered Sevuti, the moon was a thin blade in the sky. He moved like shadow, swift and silent, leaving his scent across the heart of the territory. It was not a provocation, it was a declaration. By dawn, the kings would know he had come. Their response was immediate. 3 males, thick-maned and battle-worn, rose to defend what had long been theirs. They found Waziba near the main waterhole, standing tall, unmoved. His eyes met theirs without flinch. He had waited for this. The battle that followed shook the ground. The kings fought with the fury of lions who had everything to lose. Waziba fought with the hunger of one who had built himself from nothing. Claws tore flesh. Roars split the morning air. Blood painted the grass. One by one, the kings faltered. Waziba moved with calculated rage, targeting weakness, exploiting hesitation. The first fell from a blow that crushed his jaw. The second ran, his spirit broken. The third held on, older, wiser, but his strength could not match Waziba's fire. When it was done, Waziba stood alone, his body bloodied, his breath ragged, but his will unshaken. He did not roar. There was no need. The silence of the savannah spoke louder than any sound. Sevuti was his, but the cost was written on his body. Deep gashes marked his sides. One leg limped, and his vision blurred from a wound near his eye. He collapsed beneath a lone tree, letting the pain wash over him. Vultures circled, then retreated. Hyenas came close, but backed away. Even the scavengers sensed something had changed. Waziba had not only survived, he had proven himself against legends. The ordeal had stripped him to the core, burned away all doubt. He had stepped into the fire and emerged as something else. No longer a prince, no longer a son. He was now king. Waziba healed slowly, but the land now moved around him. The pride that once followed the old kings began to approach with caution, then reverence. Lionesses observed him from the shadows, testing his gaze, his scent, his silence. When they bowed their heads, it was not out of fear, it was recognition. The watering holes that had once belonged to others now echoed only with his scent. His roar began to carry across the plains, deep and measured. It was not the loudest, but it was the kind that made hearts pause. He did not rule through noise, but through presence. Cubs followed at a distance, wide-eyed. Elders watched in stillness. Even the wind seemed to shift in his favor. But the greatest reward was not territory or submission. It was clarity. Waziba had become what he was meant to be, not by imitating his father, but by enduring every loss, every scar, and making each one a stepping stone. He had no throne but the land beneath him, no crown but the mane on his neck. But every creature that looked upon him knew this was no ordinary lion. This was the lion who had walked alone into Sevuti and stayed. Seasons passed. The rains returned, and with them, life bloomed again. Waziba stood at the heart of his kingdom, watching the herds migrate, listening to the rhythm of the earth. He had everything he once dreamed of: land, respect, power. But something deeper stirred. He thought of Sekekama, of the lessons etched into every word and silence, of Muru, who had shown him the quiet ways of the wild, of the long nights when his stomach ached and his body trembled from cold. Those memories did not fade. They shaped him. Waziba began to patrol farther, not out of need, but curiosity. He visited the old paths he once wandered. He walked the dry gorge where he met Muru. He passed by the border where he had once watched his father face challenges. He was not the same lion who had once looked at stars in confusion. Now, he understood their silence. He no longer needed to prove himself. He had already won, but he sensed that the path was not over. Something still waited. One last trial, one final roar in the dark. It came without warning. A new coalition of young males entered Sevuti. 3 of them, lean and ambitious, just as Waziba had once been. They didn't roar their arrival. They moved like he had, calculating and patient. When Waziba caught their scent, he knew this was not a mere challenge. This was the mirror of his own past come to test him. He could have summoned his lionesses, could have rallied support. But kings are made and unmade alone. He met them near the edge of his territory. His mane now held streaks of age, his body bore the weight of years, but his eyes burned with undimmed fire. The battle was fierce. They came at him with youth, speed and reckless hunger. But Waziba fought with something they did not yet know, conviction sharpened by time, pain, and memory. 2 lions fled, one stayed, too proud to run, too foolish to surrender. Waziba fell upon him with the rage of storms remembered. When it ended, Sevuti was silent again. Waziba stood, panting, bleeding, but alive. Not because he was stronger, but because he had become something more than strength. He had become the land itself, rooted, eternal. He had died a cub, been reborn a king. Now he rose once more, not for glory, but to remind the world who he was. Waziba did not chase the survivors. He let them go as Sekekama once had let others go. The land had taught him that legacy is not written only in dominance, but in restraint. He returned to the pride, slower now, but unshaken. Cubs ran to him. Lionesses greeted him with soft, watchful eyes. The plains of Sevuti stretched behind him like a crown made of grass and dust. Waziba lay beneath the same tree where he had once bled. The scars had thickened. His mane moved with the wind. Around him life thrived. He did not speak, did not roar. But those who looked upon him saw more than a king. They saw a lion who had shaped his world through silence, survival, and purpose. The story of Waziba spread beyond borders. Wanderers spoke of him in whispers. Some came to challenge, others came to learn. And though time would one day take his body, it would never claim his path. His paw prints, deep in the soil of Sevuti, would remain. For Waziba was not just a king. He was the fire that rose alone. He was the lion who became a legend.